Everyone's making out like bandits on a wildfire. I mean, except you, when all your stuff burns. And not these guys. But firefighters make good money, don't they? Well, they sure do. But these aren't firefighters. See, the Forest Service doesn't have any firefighters. Now, I know what you're thinking. He looks like a firefighter. He's wearing the yellow thingy and his face is all smudged and he's eating smoke every day, doing the exact same stuff every other firefighter does, but he's not a firefighter. He's a forestry technician. A forestry technician? Well, what the hell is a forestry technician? How should I know? I guess bush mechanic was taken. It's nothing. A forestry technician isn't anything. It's just a bureaucratic loophole that allows the Forest Service to get their men to do the work of firefighters without having to pay them like firefighters. As the Forest Service often will tell you, they are a land management agency. The base pay for firefighters in other agencies is nearly triple that of a forestry technician. You see, firefighters receive a certain pay grade called portal to portal, meaning when they go to a major fire, the moment they leave their station, their portal, they're getting full pay the entire time until they return to their portal. But forestry technicians only qualify for hazard pay when they're literally on the fire line. Forestry technicianing. If you're a CAL FIRE firefighter, you work a 24-hour shift, then you get 24 hours off in a hotel, and you get paid for those 24 hours off. Hey, you're not at home. Portal to portal. When you're a forestry technician on a campaign fire, you work 16 hours and then immediately stop getting paid. And oftentimes, you then camp out and sleep just off the fire line, unpaid. As far as the Forest Service is concerned, you're not in the middle of nowhere on a fire. You're at home in your own bed, fucking your wife. Why should you get paid for that? The smoke that you breathe during a shift on the fire line is the equivalent of roughly 8 packs of cigarettes a day. And not to mention the stump fuckers, the fire chaser beetles who swarm to burn because they like to lay their eggs in the smoldering timber and crawl inside your face. And when you're spiked out, you get all of this while you sleep. And good luck if you're on night shift, and you gotta try to get your sleep under July sunlight. And this is the closest thing to a shower that you're gonna get for half a month. California hotshots are the most elite firefighters in the world, and their base pay nets less money than a kid working at McDonald's. All because their agency classifies them as forestry technicians and not firefighters. You can tell them apart, right? Firefighter, forestry technician. Firefighter, forestry technician. See the difference? Firefighter, forestry technician. Got it? Same job, less pay. They breathe the same smoke. They get lung cancer just the same. They burn up just the same. And they die just the same. There's a lot of stuff that can kill you on a wildfire, whether you're a forestry technician or a firefighter. And it's not just the burning. Rocks, snakes, aircraft. Widowmakers.
We'll do it live. Okay. No. We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live. Thing sucks.
Welcome, everybody. Am I coming through okay? Are we able to do it live? You know that's all that matters. Welcome, everybody. It's October, and we have a government shutdown. Does anybody know what that even means? I feel like there's so much confusion about it. Now, obviously, the people who handle most of our wildland fires, which of course is the #1 threat to our national security, is wildfire. The majority of the folks who do this work are federal employees. and they're absolutely impacted by a federal government shutdown. We also have the New York Times writing a feature article on Spencer Pratt. Now, we've seen how that's gone when the LA Times writes about Spencer Pratt, or when Politico, aka Bullshitico, writes about Spencer Pratt. How do you think it went with the New York Times? how do you think they framed the Palisades fire and Spencer Pratt? The answer may surprise you, or will it? What else do we have? The mayor of Malibu still has not visited the burn area, the most significant fire. I know we get a lot of fires in Malibu. It's routine. I'm talking about this all the time. But the mayor of Malibu apparently has never visited the burn site. There's no way this is true, but we're going to find that out. Now, without burying the lead, the government shutdown, what does this mean? What does this mean for federal wildland firefighters, right? So a lot of federal employees, they get furloughed during this time. Some people are never going to come back, by the way. I think they're going to use the shutdown as an excuse to trim the fat. But when it comes to firefighters, when it comes to hotshots, when it comes to the U.S. Forest Service, they're not going to have any firefighters impacted by this shutdown because they don't have firefighters. They have forestry technicians. You just saw that in the opener. No, but seriously, their forestry technicians are also considered essential employees. So what ends up happening is they just continue working without pay. Now, they will get their pay, okay? They'll get their back pay once the shutdown is over and things start up again, but they may go 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 pay periods. You know, that's 2 weeks at a time. Now, here's the thing. You know, this reminds me of 2020, by the way. I'll get into that. But the thing that I got to tell you about right now with this shutdown, it's like, I swear, federal wildland firefighters are like the nation's punching bag. So you have all these ologists in their organization who refuse to call them firefighters. They will make them like pick up trash and clean graffiti instead of doing project work and prescribed burns. They always have to go to work, no matter what's happening. Now, if you know anything about federal government, is they actually can't strike. Okay, do you guys remember the ATC strike back in the 80s? I think it was the 80s. Was it the late 70s? Under Reagan, and he just fired them all. Okay, so this set a precedent where federal employees can't strike. And so it doesn't matter how much these forestry technicians get abused, they don't have that one option that can be very effective for collective bargaining, okay? And they don't necessarily have a very strong union. So they just have to keep going to work, and they're not gonna get paid. Now, wildland firefighters, especially in the Forest Service, their base pay is dog shit. And I mean, it's like poverty level wages. They're getting paid effectively $17 an hour. Now, that's been bumped recently, but here's the thing. These guys rely on overtime and hazard pay, especially that OT. And so on a busy year where they're getting 1,200 hours of overtime, which is nuts because that's like 6 or 7 months of full-time work of just overtime. That's extra hours. That's how much work they're doing in a busy year like 2020 or 2021. I think guys were getting 1,200 hours. It is a crazy amount of OT. That is where they really make their money, especially now that they're not going to get taxed on it. That's a big deal. So on a big year like that, if they have to work for 4 to 6 weeks without getting paid, they're probably going to be okay because they know they're going to get that back pay eventually. But on a smaller year where they're not racking up a whole bunch of H pay, that's hazard pay, they're not racking up as many overtime hours as they normally would, dude, there could be a difference like, you know, in a heavy year like 2020, federal wildland firefighters might be making close to 6 figures. They might be making $100,000 when you combine overtime and hazard. But on a slow year like this, where there ain't nothing going on. I mean, there's a few fires in the Pacific Northwest, but for the most part, things are slow. So they haven't racked up nearly as much H and OT as they normally would. So this could be a difference of like 30 grand on the year. That's very significant. So imagine trying to plan financially when your wages can vary that much, and there's zero predictability to this. And so now all of a sudden we're late in the season and these guys have to go maybe 6 weeks without pay, and they haven't had as much OT as they normally would. This could be a problem for them. Now, they're still going to show up. They're still going to do their jobs. And like I said, this reminded me of 2020. You guys remember 2020? A few significant things happened back in 2020. Now, a lot of people, government shut down everything. A lot of people were forced to stay home. A lot of people were kind of eager to stay home, which is really bizarre. And firefighters in the U.S. Forest Service still had to show up to work. They couldn't take any time off. Now, look, most of them weren't scared of COVID in the first place, so it wasn't really a big deal for them. They wanted to work. They wanted to make money. They wanted to do their hero shit. But even if they were afraid of COVID, or maybe they had an immunocompromised kid at home, I know a lot of fellas who lived out of the barracks and never went home because they are stuck in a buggy with a bunch of dudes. Every single module in the Forest Service got COVID. Every single one. They were all fine, right? Nobody really got sick at all. Only a few people even showed symptoms at any point, of course. And especially these are young, healthy, fit dudes. It was never a concern. They tried to do masking for like 2 minutes and then threw that out the window right away. But they had to keep going to work while everybody else, the real heroes, stayed home. And you'll remember 2020 was like the worst year ever, right? So we had like 4.5 million acres in California. So I remember there was a point at which grocery clerks had their pay doubled and they called it hero pay. Meanwhile, you've got hotshots risking their lives and dying like Charlie Morton did as a forestry technician making $17 an hour. Where was their hero pay? They never took a day off, ever. And they're responding to medicals, right? So they're interfacing with COVID patients all the time. They never got their pay bumped. But anyway, just a little food for thought. Remember, the real heroes, they weren't out there fighting fires in 2020. They were behind a plastic cage selling you toilet paper, that last roll of toilet paper that was left. You freaks. Everybody lost their minds in 2020. I hope that never happens again. So anyway, that is a part of the issue with this shutdown. These guys are going to be dragging out for who knows how long. I don't think this shutdown is going to last too long. Some people I don't know what you guys think. I think it's maybe going to be 2 weeks. I feel like I don't know. This one just doesn't feel like it's got any riz. But this could go on for like 6 weeks, and these dudes aren't going to get paid until that time. And so they could be hurting. So that's a big problem. Now, talking about the Forest Service and pay, we have this USA Jobs posting for the Fed Fire Chief. This was for the Fed Fire Chief. Now, we've been talking about this for a long time, and of course, I've been saying that the only person for the job is Bobby Garcia, the chief of the Angeles National Forest. Now, this is what they're going to pay the Fed Fire Chief: $191,000 to $225,000 per year. And you'll see the locations: DC and Boise. Remember, I've been talking about how we need to have this based out of Southern California, because of course, California needs the most work. California's got the most federal resources. They've got the most hotshot crews. They have the worst fires. They have the biggest problem. They have the most dire need for prescribed fire work and fuels mitigation. So it only makes sense, especially the best candidates to run this organization are Brian Fennessy and Chief Bobby Garcia. Those are absolute, and everybody agrees with this. These are the two guys, right? You pick one or the other, flip a coin, right? I still vote for Chief Garcia, but Brian Fennessy was a hotshot. He's got U.S. Forest Service experience. He's a brilliant dude. He's an outstanding chief. Everybody loves him. They're both excellent chiefs, but they're both based out of Arcadia. So why are we not putting the fire center there? It only makes sense, right? And everything else is just kind of fluff, whatever. But I was shocked at this salary. This is not high enough. This is definitely not high enough for that position. Like I said, wildfire is the #1 threat to our national security, and the Fed Fire Chief is such an important role. And we have this chance to totally restructure our wildfire agency in a way that can actually be very effective and help save our natural resources and save lives and property. Now, this is just for the Department of Interior. Okay, so we've been talking about Fed Fire and the president's executive order to stand up the National Wildland Fire Service. I refuse to call it that because it's basically the same acronym as the Fish and Wildlife Service. So that's always going to get confused. So I just call it Fed Fire. But we were disappointed to find out that the U.S. decisions I've ever seen in my life, in particular because the overwhelming vast majority of wildland firefighters are U.S. Forest Service. So if the DOI is only incorporating a few different agencies, I think it's like Bureau of Indian Affairs and BLM, dude, the Forest Service is the one they're the ones who have like basically all the firefighters. And yet U.S. Forest Service is going to remain status quo. Status quo. They're adding one more ologist, one more bureaucratic position to coordinate with Fed Fire, but they will not be in Fed Fire. Just to give you a sense of how fucked the U.S. Forest Service org structure is, look at this flowchart. Look at this flowchart. Now, I want to explain this to you because I'm not quite sure people understand the gravity of just how fucked this is. I've been trying to convey this, and it's like people don't care. I understand this is a little bit wonky, but please stick with me for this. I want to point out something. The chief of the U.S. Forest Service. Look at these boxes on this flowchart. Now, I want you to know that the greens, these are ologists. These are bureaucrats, okay? These are not operators. These are not fire experts. These are ologists. These are PhDs from Yale. They don't know anything about wildfire. Oftentimes, they're soil scientists. Maybe they're a forester, but these are bureaucrats. The people in red are the actual people who operate in the wildfire space, okay? So look at this crazy org chart. You have the U.S. Forest Chief, who is over the regional forester. That would be, in the case of California, we're talking Region 5. Then you have the forest supervisor. Then, laterally, you have the fire chief. But for some inexplicable fucking reason, look down here on the lower left. This is where all the firefighters are. For some reason, the fire chief is separated from his 3 division chiefs and all of the firefighters. What? So this is all of the hotshots, all of the engines, the water tenders, the patrols, the dozers. They're not under the fire chief. For some inexplicable reason, the U.S. Forest Service, and this totally ties in with that opening clip about the forestry technician bullshit, that bureaucratic loophole where they're trying to rat hole their firefighters and sort of keep them in this pen where they're not actually firefighters. So they're not under a fire chief, they're under a district ranger, and they're under a forest supervisor. The fire chief has to rely on his division chiefs basically conveying down the message and the mission and the culture of the firefighting workforce. But he is completely vulcanized away from them. It is the dumbest thing in the world, and it's maintained for a very specific reason. Now, they always refer to these bureaucrats as ologists, right? Soilologists, geologists, all of the, the different PhD dorks. Now, again, I'm not trying to criticize them, but here's the thing. The U.S. Forest Service is a wildfire agency. The purpose of a system is what it does. And what the U.S. Forest Service does is they fight wildfire. That is 80% of their budget, okay? And that is the number one threat to their natural resources is wildfire. So they are a wildfire agency. This idea that they're sort of like placing the fire chief in this canton and trying to strip the firefighters away from that and place them under a fucking ologist and having all of these layers of bureaucracy, this is the reason why you continue to have firefighters called forestry technicians getting shit pay. And guess what? When these guys aren't fighting fire, do you know what these ologists in green have them do? Because they're not fire chiefs, do you know what they have them doing? They have them cleaning graffiti, scrubbing graffiti and cleaning trash on the forest, like fucking day laborers. Because these ologists look down on these guys like knuckle draggers. They don't respect them as operators. They think of them as unskilled laborers. And so they're on the payroll, have them go scrub the graffiti off of those rocks. And instead of doing prescribed fire and fuels mitigation, that's what they're doing. They're treating them like fucking day laborers. This ologist culture in the Forest Service has haunted the Forest Service for decades. They've been trying to change it, and by they, I mean like the overhead, the fire chiefs, the division chiefs, the firefighters, and yet they continue to fuck this up. I was hopeful that with new Forest Service leadership, this would change. But I'm not sure that anybody's aware of just how bad this is. In all my years chasing fires around these guys, they would constantly complain about the ologists. That ologist culture is what fucks the Forest Service. And during the last administration, we had U.S. Forest Chief Randy Moore. He was a soil scientist. He was infamous because back when he was a forest supervisor, or I think he was a regional forester in California, or was the Pacific Northwest, when some of the firefighters were saying, hey man, I can't afford to make ends meet. Like we need to have pay on par with our partnering agencies. I need to be classified as a firefighter so I can get some medical benefits. And he said, if you don't like it, you can leave. And guess what happened? They all left. Under Randy Moore's stewardship, the U.S. Forest Service lost 40% of their wildland firefighting workforce. 40%. This is like biblical catastrophe. And this is what happens when you have ologists running a wildfire agency. This needs to be fixed. It needs to be fixed fucking immediately. Because I think the way that it's looking right now, and I've seen some emails on this internally from the U.S. Forest Service, it's going to be the status quo. And if you read the emails, there's a lot of coded language in there that basically indicates the ologists are still in charge and they don't give a fuck about the operators. This is a big problem and they need to fix it. So if you guys have any influence in the Forest Service, man. Casey K says, it's your government at work. Absolutely. Ken says, half the jobs I applied to this year were under the 0456 wildland firefighter, but the same PD as the forestry technician with no real change. That's the thing. It's like, I know this might be a little bit wonky, but that whole forestry technician firefighter designation, I cannot tell you how fucked it is. This is why I devoted so much time to it in Hotshot, because it's very important to the operators. It's very demoralizing. And there's also some real world consequences that come with this, because they don't get some of like the presumed illness benefits and some of the medical benefits and the spousal benefits in the case of a death that firefighters get. It's unbelievable, dude. Ugh. Casey K says, ologist culture helped let the car fire get as bad as it got. This is interesting. A CAL FIRE dozer was right there when the fire started, but the Fed Rangers wouldn't let the dozer get to work since they had to get permission from higher ups, since there might have been an archaeology site there that might get disturbed. Holy shit. Dude, that is a perfect encapsulation of the problem, right? This reminds me so much. This is when you have Team Plant. This is what happens when you have Team Plant in charge. Right? That's why it's so perfect that the ologists are in green here. They're Team Plant. So they're going to end up stopping firefighters from doing their job, okay? Because they don't want to disrupt some archaeological site or some plants. And then guess what happens? Well, the fire burns through and destroys all of it anyway. How many times do we keep repeating this pattern where we literally can't see the forest for the trees, dude? It's unbelievable, man. Okay, that's enough of that. But just get it. I want you to sear this into your brain and understand how many layers of bureaucracy there are in between overhead in the Forest Service and the actual operators who are doing the work and fighting and dying to save our lives and property, okay? And just keep in mind, the U.S. Forest Service is under the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which means the person who has oversight over the fucking food pyramid also has oversight over hotshots. It makes zero sense. They need to fix it. They need to get aligned in FedFire and like immediately. This was a huge curveball because we all assumed that the Forest Service was going to be integrated into DOI for this. At least the firefighters were. And apparently that's not happening. We'll see. We'll see. I mean, dude, we got to make some noise about this. Otherwise, I cannot tell you how many people, like if you thought that 40% attrition under the last administration was bad, it's going to be even worse. Because I can tell you, there are so many veteran guys, fire chiefs, division chiefs, superintendents, captains. These are studs who've got thousands of man hours of training and experience, these are the things that keep guys alive, right? They're all gonna leave. And then they're gonna have to fill those roles with younger guys who don't have as much experience, and people are gonna get killed. And this is 100% how it happens. This is like a 5-alarm fire. And I know it's kind of boring, but I wanted to make sure that it's clear to you guys because it's extremely important. Brandon Taylor says, what are the new Fed firemen gonna do? Who knows, man? Who knows? They'll be busy in California, I can tell you that much. So now, let's talk about the New York Times, huh? The New York Times did a piece on Spencer Pratt. So they're the latest. They're the latest to take a shot at coming at the king of media, Spencer Pratt. Look at this headline. Okay, so when you think about the Palisade Fire, when you think about what Spencer Pratt is doing, what would be your headline for that article? What would be your headline? Would it be reality TV's bad boyfriend is angry again? This time he's yelling at Gavin Newsom. This shit is so demeaning. This is the current state of journalism at the New York Times. After losing his house in the Palisades fire, Spencer Pratt has gone from the archetype of celebrity emptiness to community activist and becoming a magnet for Republican politicians. Okay. If I were to describe Spencer Pratt, I would describe him as a former reality star who lost his home, who his family lost their home, and he's pissed. He knows something went wrong with the Palisades fire, and he wants accountability. And he wants justice. Okay? But look at this is, uncharitable is the wrong word for this. This is the most cynical way of framing it. First of all, referring to him as a bad boyfriend. Reality TV's bad boyfriend? The dude's been married for what, like 12 years? 16 years? Something like that? Crazy. Dude's got kids. Come on. He's angry again. This time he's yelling at Gavin Newsom. Spencer is a happy warrior, just so you know, right? The dude, he's enthusiastic and he gets amped up on stuff, but he's a happy warrior. He is that perfect archetype. You remember that Teddy Roosevelt quote? All the glory goes to the man in the arena. You know, even though he may be laying bloodied and battered, lying in the sand of the arena floor while, you know, all the hecklers and backbenchers boo him and jeer him. He's the one with the glory because he's in there fighting. After losing his house in the Palisades fire, Spencer Pratt has gone from the archetype of celebrity emptiness. Man, they just can't resist those backhands to community activists and becoming a magnet for Republican politicians. Dude, all right. I'm not going to go, just so you know, this New York Times journalist was following Spencer around and following us around. I was around for some of this in DC, and he spent like 2 weeks with him. And I'm not gonna like single him out. I'm not gonna call him out. I'm gonna refer to the New York Times because he was a decent enough guy. We had some great conversations. I honestly would have expected more from this, but I don't know if maybe his editors changed this story, but we're gonna go through some of the highlights or lowlights, as it were. The blurring of activism and merch is one reason Pratt's detractors portray him as a yapping opportunist who riles people up instead of looking for solutions. Dude's not looking for solutions at all. Another is that Pratt dismisses climate change as a major factor in the fires. Oh my God. You see why I'm constantly getting pissed off about this shit. Now, I had these series of tweets where I posted these historical photos of like this, the Christmas fire, the Newton fire in 1956. 1938, Malibu burning. 1938, Pacific Palisades burning. 1978, Pacific Palisades burning yet again. I posted all this stuff and it went pretty viral today. A lot of people liked seeing this stuff, and I don't think anybody really knew these pictures existed. There's a reason why I keep getting pissed off at people who constantly say things are unprecedented or because of climate change. It's because, unlike them, I have seen these pictures. I do know about these fires. I know about these patterns in Malibu and Pacific Palisades. And once you learn these patterns, you understand that everybody telling you that something's unprecedented is full of shit, or they don't know what they're talking about. So it's like, again, dude, yeah, climate change is a thing, and climate certainly impacts wildfires. But again, we're not gonna, you can't assign blame to any one fire. You can't assign blame to climate change. And this idea that like we're dealing with something new is completely absurd. Look at the flames on this thing. This is from 1978. Back then, we were worried about global cooling. You guys remember that? I wasn't born until 83, but I remember that in the early 80s, we were worried about global cooling back then. We were worried about an ice age. And yet here you have 120-foot flame lengths ripping uphill in the Pacific Palisades. They like you to believe that 100-foot flame lengths are something new. It's some new magical kind of fire behavior that only exists because you drive an SUV. It's bullshit. God, fire's always been around, especially in this area. It's crazy. Pratt dismisses climate change as a major factor in the fires and instead seems to be looking for someone to blame. I wonder why. Governor Newsom's office referred to him as a C-list reality star whose post-fire ask questions later style spreads misinformation and sows mistrust. Yeah, because Gavin Newsom is the paragon of credibility and straight talk. He has the credibility of a real fire victim, though. Yeah, because he is a real fire victim. And his following can't be ignored. 1.1 million followers on Instagram and 2.2 million on TikTok. This year, a number of bills in the state legislature have been shelved or amended in response to critiques, some of them inaccurate, that Pratt pushed on social media. So is the implication that some of them were accurate or most of them were accurate? Why don't we say it like that? Why are we always choosing the least charitable and the most cynical way of portraying this? You could, like, this is a glass half full, glass half empty kind of thing, right? You could say most of them accurate, some not, but instead he just says some of them inaccurate. How many? Which ones were inaccurate? Label them. They won't do that. That Pratt pushed on social media. Nobody would attribute this to him alone. But in an era when influencers outshine local media, to many, he has become the voice of the Palisades. That's true. He is the voice of the Palisades because he's the only one with the balls to speak up. Everyone else is just mired in the fucking group chats. They're too cowardly to come out. They don't want to risk their jobs. They can't handle getting hit pieces written about them from the New York Times and the LA Times. For months, Pratt's social media presence has been dominated by hectoring posts blaming Gavin Newsom and Mayor Karen Bass of Los Angeles for failing to stop the fires. He shows up at protests. Really? When did he show up at a protest? Ray says the biggest effect of climate change so far is cronyism and inflation. That's actually very accurate. That's very accurate, dude. It is, dude. The amount of money that's in like green solutions is absolutely insane. I remember. Look, I used to be a big time climate change activist. I even got arrested in 2004 in New York at like an anti-war protest at the Republican National Convention. So I like my barefoot hippie liberal bona fides are 100%. But I remember the meme that we would always talk about is like there was so much money in big oil and we never talk about climate change because big oil and all the money in big oil is influencing the media. Dude, who's the richest man in the world? I just saw an article that Elon Musk now has like $500 billion. What does he do? He makes electric cars. And he also owns Solar City, right? All of his solutions, like batteries, Teslas, they're all predicated on the climate change narrative, right? Dude, the richest dude in the world makes green solutions. So at what point do we use that same narrative that we used to apply to big oil, to big green? You saw that they're tearing down, was it the Ivanpah solar farm on the California-Nevada border? $2.2 billion, didn't do anything. Dude, the money is just disappearing into a black hole. It's crazy. And then sure enough, all the solar panels and the EVs that the people had in the Palisades that they thought was feeding the meter on making the weather less angry, well, guess what? It didn't do that. And then they all burned up. And now they're poisoning everybody. Spencer Pratt today just found out that his soil is contaminated, which he already knew because every time he does a podcast on his property, he comes home with rashes all the time. And the Army Corps of Engineers, when they were scraping everybody's soil, they only dug down 6 inches. In Lahaina, they dug down a foot. For some reason, they only did half here. And a lot of people are screwed because of that. And so now they're going to have to pay out of their own pocket to have more remediation done because there's still toxic materials in their soil, thanks to the green industry. For months, Pratt's social media presence has been dominated by hectoring posts blaming Governor Gavin Newsom and Mayor Karen Bass for failing to stop the fires. He shows up at protests and flies to Washington to ask the Trump administration to investigate the state's leaders. He didn't ask the Trump administration. Senator Rick Scott came to the Palisades on his own. And then Spencer Pratt met with him and took him on a tour. And then he asked The only politician who is willing to visit. We have another story on this, by the way, which is unbelievable, which we'll get to. Just keep that in the back of your mind. He takes on causes that include keeping affordable housing out of his former neighborhood. Former neighborhood? It's still his neighborhood. He takes on causes that include keeping affordable housing out. He's not trying to keep affordable housing out. He's trying to keep high density housing out. He doesn't want them to add more people into a fire zone where they already had a fatal funnel trying to get out during the last wildfire. It's that simple. He takes on causes that include keeping affordable housing out of his former neighborhood, investigating how the money raised for fire victims is being spent. It's a good one. They should investigate that. Sequoia Grove says Elon Musk doesn't give a fuck about climate change. Yeah, I wonder if any of the people with green products care. Like, honestly. I have no idea. It's hard to know people's intentions. I try not to engage in bad mind reading. It's hard. It's honestly really hard for me to trust Elon on anything. Sometimes he does really great stuff. Sometimes he does the dumbest stuff I've ever seen. It's crazy for such a smart dude. He says and does some of the dumbest stuff. But yeah, it's hard to know. And you can never truly know what's in somebody's heart. I will say that my opinions on climate change have evolved dramatically. I used to be that pants-shitting guy who believed everything in inconvenient truth. and then I got old enough to see all of those doomsday predictions of apocalypse fail. They never came to pass, right? And so there's only so many times you can keep hitting that snooze button on, the world's going to end in 5 years until people start to get over it. And I think that's where people are at now. I think some of that hysteria is it's starting to come back down to earth, to a more pragmatic place where, yeah, climate change is the thing. It's something that needs to be addressed. Of course, China is the one that needs to address it most because they're responsible for the most emissions. But at the end of the day, there are way more important things. And I think the Palisades fire and the Eaton fire were a big wake-up call. And not for climate change, actually against this climate stuff. It's a realization that this nebulous idea of the end of the world coming because of climate change, it truly is nebulous. And yeah, maybe solar panels will make a difference 200 years from now. But that means how many fires are you going to have steamroll the Palisades in the meantime? So maybe we should focus our attention, time, energy, effort, and money into getting rid of fuels. Maybe. Let's go on with the New York Times. Given how polarized the nation is, it's probably not surprising that Pratt's crusade against Governor Newsom has won him new fans on the right. That's true. His feed on X, formerly Twitter. I love how they have to say that. This is the dumbest rebrand of all time. Twitter it was such an iconic name. And they have their own word for a post, a tweet. Dude, I work in marketing. You would kill for that level of branding, right? We refer to every tissue as Kleenex, right? It's not a Kleenex, that's just a brand name, right? Same with chapstick. We refer to everything of lip balm as chapstick. When you have that, you don't give that up voluntarily. This is what I mean by sometimes Elon Musk does the dumbest shit ever. To change something where you have that branding cornered and then change it to the most generic thing possible, X, what are we doing? His feed on X, formerly Twitter, I still call it Twitter, is a virtual cheering section of accounts that identify as MAGA. His fire-ravaged lot has become a venue for out-of-state Republicans to stage news conferences and make content. Do you see how petty and cynical this is? His fire-ravaged lot has become a venue for out-of-state Republicans to stage news conferences and make content. How many out-of-state Republicans have staged news conferences on Spencer's lot? None. And he refers to what Senator Rick Scott did, which is come in and check on his constituents. Because yes, he is the senator for Florida, but he is a US senator. He makes decisions that impact the entire country. And guess what? Florida has figured out wildfire in a way that California cannot seem to grasp or doesn't want to. And he sees a place where he could potentially help. And yeah, I'm sure there's some ulterior motive as well to get one over on Gavin Newsom. I'm sure that's true. But at the end of the day, he's not there just making content. Give me a break. God, it's so puerile. Oh, man. The California legislature had been debating, I'm losing this. God, this stupid menu is covering up. Had been debating a bill called SB 79 that would allow apartment buildings as high as 9 stories in neighborhoods within a half mile of major transit stops, like a light rail or bus rapid transit station, regardless of local zoning rules. The legislation wouldn't apply to the Palisades, which does not have such a stop. But for weeks, Pratt suggested it on social media that it would. This in turn had prompted the bill's author, Scott Wiener, the Democratic state senator from San Francisco, to accuse him of spreading a bald-faced lie. You guys remember this video? Oh, I don't have it. I don't have it. Do I? No, I don't. Yeah, so the whole SB 79 thing, it was going to apply to the Palisades. They have bus stops. Okay, they have bus stops. It was going to apply. The media keeps doing this stupid bullshit thing. We covered this with Bullshitico. Since, like in just the last couple of weeks, they changed SB 79 to exclude the Palisades, not because of the bus stop thing, but because of the fire risk, okay? And that's a reasonable thing. And I said, look, I have no reason to oppose SB 79, and neither does Spencer at this point, other than just, if he's got I don't know if he personally opposes it, but in terms of how it applies to the Palisades, they properly exempted it. But guess what? They only did that because Spencer was hectoring them. The original bill and the first 8 revisions of it did not carve out the Palisades as an exclusion because of a high fire severity risk. It didn't have that until Spencer complained. And so now they're complaining about Spencer complaining. Well, he's getting stuff done. And he says in a very condescending way, it was wonky stuff. How could Spencer understand this? Dude, trust me, Spencer is, I don't know if he's got ADD or something, but that dude's ability to retain information is crazy. It was wonky stuff. Ruderman, who lives in Venice, California, was aligned with Pratt on housing and had written an opinion column that called SB 79 a Trojan horse for overdevelopment, which is true. For much of the next 45 minutes, as he and Pratt volleyed about building codes and parking minimums, Montag sat cross-legged with her hands on her knees, looking as if she'd arrived with a subpoena. Dude, the way that he goes after Heidi, who we all know, she is lovely. Honestly, she is so lovely and super sharp. She is a very, very polite and well-mannered gal, and she never speaks over anybody. She listens to everybody. She waits for her turn to speak. And sometimes you might want to confuse that with she's detached, she's not participating. She's being polite. She's very polite. And then when she speaks, it's very sharp. That girl is sharp as a tack. So you underestimate that gal at your own peril. I thought that was a very condescending thing to say about her. The January wildfires, which included a dozen blazes across Southern California, have spawned several investigations by state, federal, and local authorities into their causes and local response. Whatever shortfalls they find, fire experts have said a devastating alignment of extraordinary winds and dry tinder accelerated the inferno, hampered efforts to light it, and made it nearly impossible to fully plan for. Really? Really? We have decades of this happening, and we couldn't plan for this? Now, I'm going to get into why this is so wrong, but I want to take a little trip down memory lane, because there was this news segment that this is where this fire expert stuff comes from, by the way. You remember this?
Firefighters fight these flames in LA. They are also fighting misinformation. Some claim that these fires could have been prevented through fuel management techniques like prescribed burns. I want to go ahead and bring in ABC 10's Jeannie Nguyen. She's been asking fire officials and fire experts tonight if that's true.
Well, Alex, there's been a lot of finger pointing over the severity of these fires, and many claim the state is not doing enough prescribed burning. But after talking with fire officials at the federal and state level, there is a lot more decision making that goes into this kind of fuel management.
In fiscal year 23-24, we treated 106,000 acres.
In an effort to curb wildfires, California aims to treat 1 million acres of land in the state each year. CAL FIRE plays a major role in these fuel reduction projects along with other agencies.
500,000 acres from the forest, the federal areas, and then 500,000 between CAL FIRE and then all of our local response areas. And to divide it even further, CAL FIRE's goal is to treat 100,000 acres every year.
CAL FIRE, the state's fire agency, says it met its goal for the previous fiscal year. This comes after Republican lawmakers criticized the state on Monday, saying California is not meeting its fuel reduction goals as fires continue to burn in Southern California, claiming lives and property.
There was a commitment to doing 500,000 acres a year in treatment. There was a partnership actually between the state and the federal government that the governor was proud to announce when it came out we have gotten nowhere near meeting those goals.
The U.S. Forest Service is part of the state's partnership, and right now, part of the Eaton fire is burning in their jurisdiction. As of October 2024, U.S. Forest says statewide it has done 3,500 acres of prescribed burns and more than 5,000 acres of mechanical treatments. The Forest Service says weather has played a big factor in trying to clear fuel in Southern California.
Southern California has not seen conditions appropriate for prescribed burning since last spring. So certainly we are not in any kind of condition in the southern half of the state to be looking at those prescribed fires now.
When asked if anything could have been done to prevent the destructive spread of the Southern California fires,
there's nothing. Let's just start with that. The conditions that we saw in Southern California.
I need to interrupt this. That's an ologist, by the way. This is what I'm talking about. Someone telling you there's nothing. There's nothing we could do. Sorry, there's nothing. Really? We're going to detour from the fucking New York Times right now because that just pissed me off. Like, okay, they expressed that sentiment in the New York Times. And they're doing it in this ABC piece where these are the fire experts telling you there's nothing we could do. Now, I don't know if you guys remember, but I did a stream not too long ago where I talked about how the Palisades fire was both stoppable and unstoppable at the same time. Again, this fire doesn't just steamroll over the neighborhood like a tsunami. That's not how fires work. There is so much that can be done, and I'm going to prove it to you. So let's start with, we're always going back to Brandy, but I wanted to point something out. You know what? Let's go to the tape. So this is this is on the El Medio trailhead, right here, where she's at, okay? Now, as you can see, as the fire is coming into the neighborhood, it's spotting into people's ornamental vegetation. That's where it's starting. Now, something like that, you can put out pretty easily, right? Eventually, this is gonna spread and it's gonna destroy that home, okay? And this is how these things spread through the neighborhood. But there's this point coming up. She comes around the corner. She's on Anoka here. Now look here. This hedge is on fire. It's on fire. She grabs a garden hose. Let's see if we have it right here. Now she's spraying it down with a garden hose. With one camera, she's got a camera in one hand and a garden hose in another. She came up from fucking San Bernardino, okay? How long does it take to get from San Bernardino to the Pacific Palisades and up to El Medio Trailhead? 2 hours? So this is what, like 2 hours into the initial attack. There's nobody up there. So here you have a photojournalist managed to get up there and she's spraying this house down with a garden hose with a camera in the other hand, okay? Now what became of this home? Did that do any good? Let's find out, guys. Let's go take a look on the map. We'll find that spot. Let's see, we'll type in El Medio Trailhead, Pacific Palisades. Let's go to that spot. And it was on El Medio and Anoka. Okay, now there was some devastation on Anoka, and we're gonna see that, bang. All of these homes that interface right here where you saw that fire ripping, gone, 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 and yet right here, let's go into the street view and see if this looks familiar. Oh, that's the hedge. That's the hedge that was on fire that she put out with a garden hose. And look at this. That home is still standing. And because that home is still standing, the adjacent homes are still standing. She stopped the dominoes from falling all the way through here. All the way through here. Because guess what? If these two homes catch on fire because she doesn't put that out, these catch on fire. And then these catch on fire, and these catch on fire, and these catch on fire. I would be willing to say that she saved these 3 homes, maybe 4. Easily. You can credit her for saving 4 homes. I think it's not too much of a stretch, given how, look at this pattern of burning. How once those dominoes start to fall, they just keep getting wrecked. I would be willing to say all of these homes along Anoka and El Medio, she saved. With a fucking garden hose, with a camera in one hand. Nothing we could do? Nothing we could do. A civilian photographer with a garden hose. Nothing we could do. Nothing we could change. You know, there's something that happens every time there's a fatality in the fire service. They will always do an after-action report. They will do an FLA, facilitated learning analysis, and a lessons learned. Because as painful as it may be to examine how somebody who died may have screwed up, they're going to force themselves to tackle that very difficult subject. They are going to criticize their own strategies because they don't want that to happen again. I am so sickened by the approach from, it's not just the media. I expect this bullshit from the media, but fire chiefs as well. Why do we have leadership in fire departments just throwing their hands up? Oh, nothing we can do. Is this an acceptable response to you as a civilian who pays for them to do this work? Is this acceptable to you? That they're not gonna do any hard questions. They're not gonna do any kind of after action report. We saw that McChrystal report. This was just complete dog shit. And again, what did they say? Fueled by hurricane force winds that grounded all firefighting aircraft. Again, they're going with the nothing we could do is climate change. Nothing you could do. And yet I'm watching a civilian photographer save an entire row of homes with a fucking garden hose with one hand. And she's not the only one. Did you guys see this story? LA brain surgeon saves street from apocalyptic wildfires. This dude was conducting brain surgery. He drives home to the Palisades or Malibu. Los Angeles brain surgeon who fought for almost a week to save the houses on his street from wildfires told the BBC he spent 15 years preparing for such an event. You know why that is? Because he knows that this place has fire history, right? He's well aware of all these fires. He does not have his fucking head in the sand like all of the media who is pretending like all of this stuff is unprecedented that we're seeing. He knows full well that there's fire history here. And so he'd been preparing for this eventuality because he knew it was coming. Malibu resident Dr. Chester Griffiths, 62 fucking years old, ignored evacuation orders. That's what's up. To keep flames from the Palisades fire at bay with the help of his son and neighbor until emergency services were able to reach them. This is what I'm always talking about. You got to save yourself, man, because these people, not only are they not going to show up on time, but my goodness, they're not going to have an after action where they question, hey, could we do, like if we've got a civilian photographer and a 62-year-old brain surgeon saving homes, is there something we could do differently? Really? Nothing we could do? We'd always known that a fire would come someday, but we didn't know when, Dr. Griffiths told BBC's Today program. We never fathomed it would be this catastrophic and apocalyptic. Dr. Griffiths said he had finished performing brain surgery just hours before he returned to his Malibu street last week to fight the fire, joined by his son Chester Jr. and neighbor Clayton Colbert. The houses were coming down like dominoes. What did I say? Brandy disrupted that. Thankfully, he and Mr. Colbert developed an action plan in the event of such a fire and had sourced hoses that they could use. Connecting 4 hoses to hydrants, Dr. Griffiths, his son, and Mr. Colbert positioned themselves on nearby roofs to spray water on the flames and use dirt to put out embers on the ground. This is sound tactics. There were burning embers coming down on us for about 12 hours. This is why, like, just a drive-by from a fire engine is not good enough. This is why you got to stay and defend. I've always talked about this. You're probably not going to get confronted with a wall of fire, right? Your home is going to get compromised by that one little ember that gets into your gutters and the pine needles that's in there and then slowly catches fire. A fire truck might drive past your home and say, hey, they're good, and keep going, right? And then that ember is starting to catch on the other side of the house and it's invisible until it's too late. But if you are there, right, and you're constantly monitoring, so when there's an ember cast coming over your home, you're checking to see, all right, did any of those catch? And you're wetting down the gutters, you're wetting everything down. If you're there tending to your home, you can stop it from becoming a conflagration. The trio were only joined by firefighters in the last few days of their week-long ordeal because resources were so widely stretched due to the number of blazes in the Los Angeles area. The fire department felt that all the homes weren't able to be saved. We call that a clue. And the thing is, there's only so many they can save. They have only so many firefighters. This is why you have to be your own brigade. He says he totally understands why the fire service was too busy to help. Exactly. Adding, that's why it's so important to be trained ahead of time, to have your equipment and truly to have your community's support. Fire crews in Los Angeles are still battling 2 larger blazes. The Palisades fires burning. Okay. This is why I get pissed off when these people keep telling me, all these fire experts are saying there's nothing you could do. And yet here we have a photographer and a brain surgeon saving multiple homes. Nothing we could do. Nothing we could do, huh? You guys remember this? Remember this? Look how calm this is, by the way. But homes are still burning. Winds are not cranking at all. Listen to this.
You guys still having water problems?
Yeah, no water. No water at all. Ran out.
No water. Can't get any water tenders. We ran out. Wind is no longer an issue here, so the unprecedented climate change stuff, that unstoppable weather component is not a factor now, but the homes are going to continue to catch fire because they're out of water. Now, obviously, look, there's got to be something else we can do, right? If you run out of water, that can't be you can't just put your hands on your hips and say, well, I guess there's nothing we can do. Do we not have the capacity to draft out of swimming pools? Now, right here, they're doing a water shuttle, so maybe that's what they are doing. Maybe they're just trying to be as resourceful as they can, and maybe someone is drafting out of a swimming pool and then doing a water shuttle and taking it to different engines. But man, we have to have something. There's got to be something, right? We can't just accept that, oh no, nothing we can do. Now, beyond that, I want to get back to the New York Times article. Let's get through some of this stuff. Ray says, don't forget the 1964 Hanley fire started in almost the same area as the 2017 Tubbs fire. The Tubbs fire was nasty. Nasty, nasty, nasty. That was one of the worst fires ever. My goodness, what a nightmare. In a written statement, the Water and Power Utility said no water system can deliver reliability when subjected to the stress of massive wildfires like the Palisades fire. This is true. That part's true. And argued that the empty reservoir did not affect the firefighting effort. That is not true. This is the thing. They always try to couch a truth and a lie. So obviously, the empty reservoir did affect the firefighting effort, and this is where people get distracted. Altadena lost water as well, okay? So I don't necessarily freak out about the fact that the hydrants went dry in the Palisades, okay? Because it's inevitable. I've seen it happen on so many fires. This is inevitable in foothill areas where you have gravity-fed water supplies, you have a bunch of homes losing all their plumbing, you're gonna run out of pressure at some point. Obviously, having the reservoir probably would have maintained pressure a little bit longer, but the real problem is that those helispots at the Palisades Reservoir and the San Ynez Reservoir, both in the Palisades, were both empty, and those helispots were not operational. And so those helicopters we saw had to fly so much farther away to reload, thus increasing the amount of time that they were away from the fire, that they weren't dropping water on it. So it absolutely did impact the firefight. It's an insane lie to say that it didn't. Pratt has no patience for complicated realities. You see how condescending that shit is? This, I hate this. What a condescending, cunty statement. Pratt has no patience for complicated realities. That's basically another way of saying, Pratt, you simple-minded fuck. Go home. You don't understand reality because your stupid little Neanderthal brain can't understand nuance and complicated realities, in which there are many factors and no clear villain. God, this pisses me off. He rejects explanations like extreme weather, climate change, and the fact that the hills around the Palisades in Malibu have been burning for generations. Dude, do you understand how you contradict yourself immediately? This sentence is contradictory. So we're going to blame climate change, but we're also going to acknowledge that this place has been burning forever. Do you not understand the conflict here? You're trying to say that unprecedented climate change is making these fires do something new. But at the same time, you're also saying, it's always been burning like this. It's your fault for living here, Spencer, you fucking moron. Now, look, there is something to be said for living in these fire-prone areas and not doing any fuels clearance. That's 100% a valid criticism. You know what I mean? We can live in these areas, but we have to be smart about it. But it's such a contradictory statement here. Instead, he places most of the blame on a handful of politicians that he argues fell down on the job, because they did. They had 2 empty reservoirs, and they didn't do any fuels clearance in a place that has been burning for generations. I love how the burden of that historical information only falls onto Spencer Pratt, according to the New York Times, but not on Gavin Newsom, whose state park is what caught fire in the first place, right? It's in his own fucking manual. Does Spencer Pratt have a manual for his home that says, you must clear your brush? No, he doesn't have that. But the state does. So he is right to blame politicians for falling asleep on the job, because they did. So if you're going to say that the real factors is this place burns regularly, why are you not putting that on the politicians? Spencer Pratt cannot go into the state park and clear the fucking brush. Only the governor can do this. God, this is so absurd. Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass are well aware of Pratt's online attacks and outreach to national Republicans. He's not reaching out to them. They're reaching. Oh my God. He would take help from anybody. And in an emailed statement, Bass said Pratt was lashing out and creating confusion, but they have mostly tried to ignore him. This is how you treat a fire victim? God, these people are craven. The crux of Pratt's lawsuit is that the Palisades fire is a story of mismanagement. If the surrounding hills had been cleared of brush, if the nearby Santa Ynez Reservoir hadn't been empty and offline, if more fire trucks and water tenders had been stationed nearby, the Palisades would still be standing, the suit argues, and that's true. It is one of dozens against the city, state, and insurance companies that are poised to drag on for years and already total tens of billions in claims. We're all working towards the same goal, helping the community heal, said a spokesperson for the governor. Yeah, that's why you call him a C-list reality star. That's you helping the community heal. That's why the governor is not going to the Palisades and trying to help. Pratt's view of healing is less ideological than nostalgic. He's against affordable housing one minute, then fighting to save a trailer park the next. Why do you think that is? It's because he's actually not against affordable housing, you fucking morons. He's against high-density housing. This is journalism today. He said he didn't want the single-family home neighborhoods in the Palisades to change, but that apartment complexes that previously existed should come back at the same scale. Seems pretty straightforward, dude. The main theme of his advocacy is that he wants whatever gets rebuilt to look more or less how he remembers it. When the Palisades burned down, Pratt lost the one place in the world where he wasn't just a jerk on TV. This is so cunty. This dude has kids. This dude has friends. Everybody in the Palisades loves this guy. And even before he started advocating on their behalf for the fire, everybody loves the guy. He's a very lovable dude, especially when you meet him in person. This is so demeaning. He's not just a jerk on TV. Yeah, fucking break. He says, in my version of my life, my kids were going to live here and I was going to be a grandfather and do Palisades baseball, do the whole thing, he said. These people always stood by me. Pratt's neighbors all have the same unmoored sense of loss. The question some have is whether his fury might be alienating the very state and local leaders they need on their side. They're not fucking showing up, dude. Where are the California senators? Where are they? I'm gonna cut away to this one story. Speaking of the local leaders who just, man, they're just so alienated. See this article from Malibu Daily News. Palisades fire rebuilds on track to take 9 to 16 years to complete. I think it's going to be 25 years. Malibu rebuilding ambassador exposes City Hall derailing fire victims. So these are these great politicians who get no fucking criticism in the New York Times article. None. These are these benevolent, just public servants who are derailing fire victims. The removal of Abe Roy, the Malibu's rebuild ambassador after the Palisades fire, has become a flashpoint that exposes the deeper dysfunction and political maneuvering obstructing recovery. The announcement blindsided residents and council members alike, arriving just before the September 29th council meeting, which amended its agenda to include a ceremonial commendation for Roy's service. To many, the move reeked of politics. Families who trusted him to challenge the system complicated by design were left reeling. As one resident asked, why would the city remove a fellow resident that fire victims trust to deal with the collective power of City Hall? That's a good question. The decision was not a coincidence. It was clearly orchestrated from the top. A decision was made after interim city manager Candace Bond complained directly to Mayor Mary Ann Riggins that Roy was micromanaging staff, resulting in Riggins taking personal interest to eliminate his role. Wow. Councilmember Doug Stewart backed her, lending political cover to the mayor's maneuver. These are these benevolent public servants. By siding with Riggins instead of the very residents still fighting to rebuild, Stewart positioned himself not as an advocate for the displaced, but as complicit in their abandonment. This is the story of every single fucking California politician, just abandoning these people. What makes this betrayal all the more galling is Riggins' own admission. It took her more than 5 months to visit the burn areas. 5 months. This is the mayor of Malibu. Didn't bother to visit the burn area for 5 fucking months. Could you imagine that? And there's no commentary on this in the New York Times. It's just Spencer's alienating the people who are here to help. Yeah, yet they can't even visit the burn area. To Malibu's displaced families, that confession was not simply tone deaf, it was moral negligence. How can a mayor strip away their only advocate without ever standing in the ashes of their destroyed homes? How can Stewart defend her decision while families sleep in rentals and motels, their insurance running out, their futures uncertain? For victims, this is leadership in name only, absent when it counts and dismissive when challenged. Worse, Riggins was the only one. She was the one who personally demanded that Roy remove the damning slide from his first presentation to council, the slide that showed, based on Malibu's current process, it would take 9 to 16 years for the fire victims to rebuild. That single act of suppression transformed the crisis from incompetence into deception. By hiding the truth from the public, Riggins deliberately denied victims the transparency they deserve. This was not an isolated act. Riggins has a history of orchestrating deals behind the scenes to benefit developers and staff over residents, most notably with the skate park projects and in dealings with developer Steve Gillen, a pattern long noted by a community watchdog, Andy Lyon. So you have a local resident who is appointed to be the rebuild ambassador, and he's showing people to manage their expectations that it's going to take about 9 to 16 years based on the way the city is handling things. And the mayor pushed him out because of that. This is like dictatorship. And yet, in the New York Times, the way they frame it, Spencer Pratt trying to hold people like this accountable is somehow alienating these noble public servants who are only here to help. This is a fucking disgrace. Oh my gosh. All that anger is not going to get houses rebuilt any faster, said Jed Weitzman, who didn't even lose his fucking house, by the way. Music industry executive who lives in the Palisades and has known Pratt since he was a child. Didn't lose his fucking house, by the way. Have I mentioned that? You need to figure out a way to work within the reality of the situation, no matter how painful or how difficult. He didn't lose his house, by the way. Did I mention that? I'm so sick of this shit. People who didn't lose anything trying to tell someone who lost everything how to behave. Unacceptable. And dude, I've said this over and over. Spencer Pratt is the only one getting anything done. He has done more, like, you guys know me, right? I made an entire fucking film about fuels management. Spencer Pratt has done more to raise in the public consciousness the idea of fuel mitigation and prescribed fire than anybody else I have ever seen. In all of my years observing the fire industry, no one has been able to get this to penetrate popular culture like Spencer because of his unique set of skills and his audience and his relentless passion for this. And I will admit this freely. As someone, I spent my own fucking money making a movie about this. And even though we have massive viewership on that movie, and we've reached hundreds of thousands of people, at the same time, Spencer has been able to do, just with his TikTok, way more. To the point now where the normies are submitting pictures to his Instagram posts and his TikToks. They're sending him DMs showing, hey, here's the state park behind my house. Look how overgrown it is. People are internalizing this idea of fuel overgrowth in a way that never happened before. Never. So this dude, I don't care if you disagree with his tactics, he's getting shit done. He's getting shit done. And now, as I've shown multiple times on this live stream, you now see agencies around Malibu and Topanga State Park, they're bragging about the fuels clearance that they're doing. That's never happened before, ever. We've never seen that. A few weeks after the zoning podcast, Pratt was standing by a baggage carousel at Ronald Reagan International Airport when a bulldozer operator and his wife walked up to thank him. I know a little something about this story. Pratt had flown to Washington for 2 days of meetings with lawmakers that included a news conference on the congressional investigation that Senator Scott had promised to pursue during his tour of the Pacific Palisades. At the Los Angeles airport, on the plane, and in the nation's capital, fans approached Pratt to say, and in one case, shout out from a restaurant patio that they loved what he was doing in California, and to compliment his Newsom will not be president hat. So he mentions this chance encounter with a bulldozer operator from California. He only mentions it to point out that Spencer Pratt has fans. That is not the crux of the story. Spencer Pratt coincidentally ran into a dozer operator at the airport in DC from California. This is a veteran dozer operator. I'm going to protect their identity by not saying what agency they work for. Spencer was talking to him, and he had mentioned my live stream where I had pointed out a firing operation that they could have done around the Palisades to clear out fuels just around the neighborhood, and would have cost between $500,000 to $750,000. And his response was, "Oh, dude, 2 dozers, we can get that done for $250,000." He's like, "Absolutely, we could do that." And he also went on to complain about how a lot of the dozer operators, they're precluded from doing what they need to do because of what we saw in Topanga State Park with the milk vetch plant. How he's like, dude, there's all these exclusion zones. And even KCK mentioned this on the car fire. He mentioned this on the car fire, how they had ologists blocking dozer operators from getting to work to try to put out this fire because they were worried about an archaeological site. Look, I get the concern, but man, we got priorities, dude. And so, and this is the thing. How are you leaving out that? That is the key of that encounter with the dozer operator. Not that he was thanking Spencer, but that he was validating the fact that Spencer's complaints are accurate, that they could have prevented this. And all these fire experts, including that ologist from the Forest Service who's saying, "Oh, there's nothing." Such a flippant disregard of the reality. There are so many things you could have done to stop this fire, both before and during. The next morning, Pratt made a swing through the office of Jim Jordan, the Republican congressman from Ohio and chair of the House Judiciary Committee, to press for an investigation of the fire aid charity that Pratt believes is misusing funds raised for fire victims. A few days earlier, in response to criticism, Fire Aid released an independent review of its grant activity that found no misuse of funds. Dude, they paid a supplicant law firm to do that review. That's not an independent review. That's their own client. What the fuck? That's not an independent review. If you hire a team of lawyers to investigate you, and guess what? We investigated ourselves, found no fraud. Of course, the New York Times isn't going to give you that context. They're not going to tell you that Fire Aid hired these people to do this. It's their own law firm. It's unbelievable. I asked Pratt at one point if he considered, and by the way, they didn't do a single forensic audit whatsoever. They didn't do that. I told you that some of the attorneys that we met with in DC and one of the forensic accountants at the IRS, just their first glance at the paperwork on Fire Aid, they're like, "Oh, we already found like a dozen red flags and we haven't even looked into it yet." So it's like that whole independent review, throw it out the window, dude. I asked Pratt at one point if he considered the possibility that he was being used. Doors were opening now that he was trying to make Governor Newsom look inept. Dude, Governor Newsom does that all on his own. He is fucking inept. Guy's corrupt as shit. He might find that the politics become trickier if the Palisades, a high-end Democrat voting enclave in a blue city in a blue state, were to, say, ask for federal rebuilding funds. Bro, they already got a 100% FMAG. 2 of them. One for the firefight and one for the clearance of all that debris. Who do you think is doing all this work? It was the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that did all this work. Get the fuck out of here. God. Pratt said that it was possible he was being used, and he didn't care. What have I always told you? Dude doesn't give a fuck. He will work with anyone who is willing to help the Palisades, regardless of party. That's the one thing that they get right in this article. He will work with anyone who is willing to help the Palisades. I've said this over and over and over and over again. I'm glad it's finally penetrating in the mainstream. All right, let's look at the comments, guys. Brandon Taylor, I have a video that was sent to me of a person driving around the Palisades at 5 a.m. on the 8th, and the video is 8 minutes long, and you don't see a single fire truck. It's insane. My goodness. This is why we need this independent investigation. Because I'm telling you guys, I feel like the Altadena fire was way more challenging. And again, I'm never going to say the Palisades fire wasn't going to be a monster fire. It's destined to be that because of the lack of fuel mitigation, right? And those 38 mile per hour winds, even though they're not hurricane force winds, those are monster winds for a fire, guys. I've said that a million times. But there's just, I don't know, man. There's just so much fuckery on that fire. to me, it's unacceptable, the level of damage that was done. And this idea that there's nothing that we could do. And you remember that video we played a week or so ago where Gavin Newsom was being pressed by a New York Times reporter saying, so nothing would change? And he just bullied his way through that conversation, refused to ask it. Clearly, there's gotta be something we could do, right? Something? Are we really not willing to ask that hard question? Dude, I remember when Granite Mountain got burned over, there was actually a big problem in that people were afraid to do an AAR on that. There are some very tough questions that have to be asked about, why they left the black and got into that position where they were. And people were afraid to ask these questions because it's such a horrific tragedy. And it's easy to feel like you're speaking ill of the dead just by asking questions and asking, hey, is there something that we could do differently? But, God bless, some of the other soups, and I think Brian Frisbee was sort of on top of this. They were really pressing the Forest Service like, hey man, I get it. We need to ask some questions about what happened here. And we need to learn from this. The fact that it was such a tremendous tragedy actually makes that even more critical, right? You don't avoid it just because of the magnitude of the tragedy. And we can't avoid asking tough questions about the Palisades fire. And I don't mean like fucking, stupid Candace Owens types questions like, oh, was it Jews firing space lasers? I mean real questions like, hey man, clearly there's something we can do better. What is that? Like, even if it's just as simple as like, look, there's a lot of swimming pools in the Palisades. You know how like when you see a little marker on the street, there's a blue marker, one of those reflective markers on the street. Whenever you see a blue one, that's an indicator, here's a fire hydrant. What if like every house that has a pool, you put, a green marker out in front of it, something on the curb to indicate to resources, hey, there's a big water source back here. So if the fire hydrants go dry, you guys can draft out of this. Or, get some buckets, for fuck's sake. Just do something. There's gotta be some kind of reflection on what we can do better. Because I'm telling you, I've been on a lot of these fires. The level of loss on this fire is disproportionate to what that fire was. Sue Thompson says, even if a resident gets a permit from state parks to remove fuels adjacent to their home at their own expense, they can only remove with 135 feet of the ground line of a habitable structure. And that is not enough. That is not enough. And look, I'm not saying that we need bare mineral soil for 300 feet. You just need to break up that mosaic and give people a chance. And the thing is, okay, the whole thing about fire breaks, every time I talk about a fuel break, there's always some fucking genius who has to come in and say, well, fires will spot a mile ahead of themselves. You're not going to build a mile-wide fire break. You got to understand that there's a huge difference. If you're talking about a fuel break in the middle of an ocean of fuels, okay, so like brush, and you cut a dozer line, and you've got brush on this side and brush on this side. Yes, that can spot pretty easily over to the other side. That doesn't mean that it's ineffective, because guess what? What that fuel break does is it converts head fire, which you have no chance of managing, it converts that head fire into a spot fire, which you can manage. You might not always do that, but at least you have a chance, okay? And this is the big difference. A fuel break doesn't stop the fire from getting to the other side. Oftentimes it will, but under extreme conditions, no, it's not gonna stop the fire from getting to the other side. But what it does is it converts head fire into a spot fire. Now, here's the main difference of what I'm talking about around places like the Palisades. Homes do not burn the same way that vegetation does, right? The vegetation burns through really rapidly. It has a very high probability of ignition. And oftentimes you don't see the homes going up until well after that fire front has already pushed through, because it takes a while for that spot, for that ember to find its way into a receptive area of the home, right? It has to develop. It has to climb a ladder. Like, it has to get the ornamental vegetation going, and then that extends up into the eaves, or it gets the fence, and then the fence is attached, and then that gets into the eaves, and then it goes. It takes a while for that to happen. A spot dropping into a neighborhood is not going to immediately just run, but a spot jumping a fire break into another bed of vegetation, yes, it's going to be landing on something very receptive to burn, and then it's going to rip. Okay, it's not the same when a spot lands in a neighborhood. In addition to that, half of the neighborhood is not flammable because it is concrete streets. So there's a 50-50 chance that when you get a firebrand shooting into that neighborhood, it's just going to land on concrete and it's not going to do anything. So if you reduce the amount of spots coming into that neighborhood, you exponentially reduce the likelihood of it catching on fire. So if you cut a fuel break directly up against the homes, then what you have is you have spots trying to land in a much less receptive environment than that brush. And every 10 feet that you push that fire line back, it exponentially reduces the amount of embers hitting that neighborhood. Exponentially. It's not just like every 10 feet, it just reduces it 10%. It's like a logarithmic curve. And if you're able to push that fire front back 300 feet, the odds of an ember landing in that neighborhood full of concrete and swimming pools and gravel, the odds of that ember finding its way into your house are exponentially reduced. So everybody who tells you, oh, you can't, a fire break doesn't work because fires will spot half a mile ahead, you don't understand. A fire break converts a flaming front into a spot fire that you can manage, okay? You might not always manage it, but you can. And especially when you put that fuel break right up against your structures, right up against your concrete jungle, the odds of you surviving go up exponentially. Sick of these arguments, dude. Ken was talking about the brain surgeon who saved all those homes. Well, he's a brain surgeon. S211 was probably a cakewalk with friction loss calculations. That's a good one. Oh my God. Sequoia Grove says, you missed a great opportunity in your fire history talk to mention Oakland Hills and Berkeley. Brother, you know how many times I've mentioned the Oakland Hills fire? Do you want me to I could talk to you guys about fire history for 92 hours. Do you want me to go down that road? I have to be selective about the fires that I talk about. So I've talked about the Oakland Hills fire a lot, particularly because it was a rekindle. It was a devastating urban conflagration that started as a rekindle of a fire that they thought was out, the same as the Palisades fire. So I've mentioned that quite a few times. Casey K says, the fire chiefs can't tell the truth or else the political leaders will fire them. This is 100% correct. And keep in mind, fire chiefs are politicians. They are politicians. The only exception I will grant is Bobby Garcia. That dude is very unique. He's a very, very unique guy. And he has retained his identity as a fucking knuckle dragger hotshot. And it shows. And that's why he's so pragmatic. And that's why he gets so much done. Because he's not like trying to jockey for some kind of political position. He just knows exactly what the operators need and he gets it done. That's why he was the only one, the first dude to ever convert all of his hotshots to permanent firefighters. That's why he's able to get this night flying helicopter platform. This is why he was the first one to do live tracking of all of his resources, which is something the U.S. Forest Service still does not have. They don't know how to keep track of their resources. And this was a huge problem on the Bobcat fire. I'm going to tell that story one day. A huge problem. But Bobby Garcia is the only one who's actually doing that stuff. See, he's pretty unique when it comes to fire chiefs. Ray said, did I say that a man wrote that article? I don't know. You're going to have to find out yourself. I told you I'm not going to call out the individual because, he's a nice enough guy and, we had some good conversations. But, I understand that these things always have to go through editors at these publications. And to a certain degree, there might be stuff in there that, he had for context and that his editors made him get rid of. We don't know. So, this is more an indictment of the New York Times as a whole. I think it's just really shoddy journalism. Brandon Taylor says, I should talk about the Kenneth fire. They were able to quickly knock it out during the Palisades fire since they did a backburn and took out the fuel. That's actually a really good point. I'm gonna do that maybe on the next stream. That's actually a really good point because the Kenneth fire, I don't know if you guys remember, but that lit off during all this chaos, and yet they were able to knock it down pretty effectively. And they had the balls to do a firing operation in those winds. So yeah, I'm sick and tired of hearing people say that nothing can be done. There's always something that can be done. And always keep in mind that wind-driven fires are very directional. And so on the flanks, the fire intensity is way different than that flaming front. Look, of course, on the flaming front, a lot of times, you can't do anything with that. It's just going to do what it's going to do. But you're not, in a complex urban environment like this, you're not always dealing with head fire, especially when it's directional like this. So this idea that we couldn't have gotten more resources up there, that we can't train civilians to stay and defend their property the way that we saw Brandy do that, where she, with a camera in one hand, she single-handedly saved an entire row of homes by just extinguishing this little thing right here, right? This is what ends up knocking out an entire neighborhood. It's just something this simple, you know? So this is why I get pissed off when people say this. Brandon Taylor continues, the only reason they could backburn was because CAL FIRE was there, since LA County and LA City aren't allowed to start backburns. Oh yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. They don't have burn bosses because they're like, they're more municipal agencies. You know, these are guys who are primarily dealing with reviving drug addicts on the street in Skid Row. That's their main job, and structure fires. LA County is a contract agency with CAL FIRE, but yeah, they don't do firing operations. Sequoia Grove says, not to be annoying, but you have to consider how different the fuel and access was for Kenneth. Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. I'm not doing a one-to-one comparison, but it's just, again, like, look at this video. Look at this video. Do you see all these spot fires in ornamental vegetation? These could be handled with buckets. That could be handled with a bucket. And yet nobody's there to do that. And I'm not blaming the firefighters. The homeowner's not there to do that. This could be handled with a garden hose. And yet it's going to end up eating these homes alive. That could be handled. All of these this is how the fire moved through the Palisades. And so, like, when people tell me, oh, you're not considering all this, like, dude, you know how much video I've seen? We're talking to people who have spent like thousands of hours on these fires. I'm not just making this stuff up. I'm not making this stuff up. Okay? This is how fires move through these neighborhoods. They stalk through, they're spotty. You don't have to take my word for it. Just watch. Watch with your own eyes. This is why it's so important that Brandy does these live streams when she goes to these fires. Because here you can see with your own eyes, you can see her putting out this fire and saving these homes with a garden hose. Okay, so we saw the story of the brain surgeon who saved an entire street. We're not making this stuff up. It's doable. It's savable. Imagine if you had these dudes every 10th home. How many homes would we have saved? Do you still think we would have lost thousands of homes if everybody in the neighborhood were like this? Come on, let's get real. Let's get real. Let's hold ourselves to a higher standard. You know, I've been doing multiple live streams where I talk about the need for us to be more resilient and to think about how we're going to stay and defend our homes, right? And not just knee-jerk evacuate. You have to have enough discernment to know when you're in a bad spot, but these guys were prepared. This is a model of preparedness. This is what I'm talking about. You can do this. You don't have to accept your entire town burning down. You don't. I don't care how many ologists tell you there's nothing you can do. Like, are you going to believe them or are you going to believe your lying eyes? When a fucking brain surgeon leaves brain surgery and then goes and saves a dozen homes. And yet the fire experts say this is not possible. According to those ologists, those damned ologists who are in between the fire chief and the operators, those ologists are saying, nothing we can do. Now do you see the problem with these fuckers having so much authority in the Forest Service? Is because they just throw their hands up and say, nothing we could do. I'll tell you what, talk to Chief Barbie Garcia. Ask him, hey, is there nothing we could do? Is there nothing we could have done in LA County's park, the Eaton Canyon Nature Reserve? Is there nothing we could have done in there to prevent this fire? I guarantee you, Bobby would not throw his hands up and say, nothing we could have done. Guarantee you that. That dude is, he's done a lot of work with fuels reduction. And he's done a lot of innovative stuff. And I don't know how he pulls it off with the budget that he has, hamstringing him all the time. This is why he needs to be fire chief. And we need to get the Forest Service to get in alignment with with Fed Fire. All right, guys, an hour and 31 minutes. That was a good one. That was a good one. Yeah, if you're subscribed to the New York Times, cancel that shit. These people are worthless. There's a part of me, again, I like the guy who was following us around, but like, I'll be honest, I thought the report would be a little bit better than this. So it's pretty disappointing. And I don't know if it's his fault or if it's his editors, but the New York Times is only fit for bird cages. And the LA Times is pretty awful, but there's still that glimmer of hope with Noah Haggerty. right? Remember that great article that he did that I featured? I hope that he gets more assignments, because if he's writing, I think we're going to get much better material, and we're going to start educating the public on how they can live in fire country, because that's what this is all about. So anyway, appreciate all the comments, guys. You guys rock. I love learning from you guys. Thank you for your input. Brandon, awesome insight. You gave me some good content for the next one. All right, guys, in this dystopian world of AI, the only way to prove you're human is to stay and defend your home and do it